a Marshallese government supply ship on my way back from Venezuela Castle, where I've been reporting on the nuclear waste sites threatened by climate change. This is exactly the kind of stories I like to do, where I can combine on the ground, street level reporting with the foreign policy lens, hopefully carve out a space for myself in the male-dominated world that is foreign policy. Thank you.
Kim was an artist and a storyteller in every sense.
She seemed to be utterly and uniquely unafraid of going into uncharted territories.
She had wanderlust in droves, and it hung off her every word.
Kim had an infectious curiosity that was almost childlike in nature, full of innocence and goodwill.
She grabbed every opportunity she could. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Along the way, her life became an adventure.
The world through Kim's eyes was a rare and special perspective. She didn't shy away from tough questions.
My friend Kim wrote stories that transformed cultural anthropology into popular narratives.
She made going from continent to continent look like it was no big deal.
We complain often that journalism lacks creativity and depth, but Kim had so much of both.
She told human stories. In the same way she lived her life, she told them with grace, dignity, and joyous care for our shared experiences.
I remember when she told me about her upbringing. Both of her parents were journalists, and she had often accompanied them on small reporting trips. That's why she's so good, I thought.
Kim would have wanted more women out in the world, brushing up against life.
She gave voice to the weak, the vulnerable and marginalized people. That voice has been needed for a long time. Now it will not be.
It's one of our greatest privileges as an organization to carry forward Kim's vibrant spirit and her journalistic ethics and ethos through the Kim Wall Memorial Fund. And we are really thrilled today to be able to announce this year's grantees. First, we'd like to recognize Raquel Carvalho, a Portuguese multimedia and print journalist based in Hong Kong, whose reporting focuses on women's rights, human trafficking, labor, and migration. Congratulations. And second, recognizing Diana Cruzman, a freelance and American freelance journalist who has investigated the impact of climate change and nuclear contamination in the US, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Congratulations. We're so lucky to be joined by both Diana and Raquel today. And at this time, I'd like to pass the mic over to Ingrid and Tom, who are going to speak with our two new grantees to learn a little bit more about your projects.
All right, so let me be one of the first to say congratulations. It's I'm so honored to have another year where we have so strong grantees, and I would like to just let you speak a little bit about your projects and how you learned about this topic. So Raquel, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you very much for meeting you and for choosing my project. I cannot begin to say how such an enormous responsibility it is to do these projects with this support. So yeah, thank you so much. My project is focused on migrant women who fall sick while working overseas. They are among thousands of women from countries like the Philippines, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, who migrate to wealthier regions such as Hong Kong and Singapore, seeking better wages. I learned about this issue because I cover migration, and I have written stories about domestic workers who were forced to return home after being wrongfully dismissed. Some had been severely sick or suffered abuse, And in some extreme cases, domestic workers have died overseas or shortly after they return home. But most cases I covered and most cases I've heard of, they tended to be brushed under the carpet. There's really no accountability and a general lack of transparency over the details of each case. So the starting point of this project is Hong Kong, where there are more than 360,000 migrant domestic workers. And the idea is to look at the challenges that these women and their families have faced. So my intention is to start at a destination country and also look at the issues back in their home countries.
Wow.
So that's kind of my project in a nutshell.
Right. And Diane, would you like to tell us a bit about your project?
Yeah, definitely. And I also want to echo what Raquel said, that this is a huge honor to receive this award, especially as a freelancer. It's so difficult to feel like you know what you're doing without institutional backing, kind of stumbling around trying to get these projects done. But to have the backing of an institution like the IWMF is so invaluable. So thank you for that. And yeah, I would be happy to talk about my project. I can give a bit of a backstory. So I cover climate change, environmental issues, human rights, mainly in Central Asia and the Middle East, although I'm currently based in New York. But I was based in Central Asia 2 years ago, where I started reporting on Kazakh youth activists who are trying to revive the legacy of this anti-nuclear movement from the 90s. So the Soviet Union used Kazakhstan as the testing ground for their nuclear tests during the Cold War. And it's left this legacy of really terrible health impacts, environmental impacts. And I found out while doing that reporting that actually in the early 90s, there was a transatlantic movement between Kazakh activists and Western Shoshone activists in Nevada. So they actually collaborated and helped each other with strategies of how to protest against nuclear testing, because the Western Shoshone people, an indigenous tribe in Nevada, also were impacted by this. The US conducted over 1,000 nuclear tests in Nevada on land that the Western Shoshone never officially gave up to the US government. So they made treaties that the government would not be taking that land, and then they did anyway. Those treaties were broken, and now we have a national security site in Nevada that the Western Shoshone are saying should not be there. So I was able to write about the Kazakh side, and now I'm able to, thanks to the support of this project, write about the Nevada side. So I'm going to be traveling to Nevada in April. There's a march called the Sacred Peace Walk that takes place from Las Vegas to the Nevada test site over the course of a week, where activists, both indigenous and non-indigenous, are going to be protesting the ongoing testing that occurs at this site. So even though the Cold War is over, we're still testing nuclear weapons on this land that is tied up with these questions of indigenous sovereignty and the responsibility of the US government for the health impacts that are still ongoing. So that's my project in a nutshell.
That's wonderful. I'm almost interested. How do you come up with ideas like this? Where do you find the inspiration? Where do you even start?
I would say for myself, part of it is the more I report, the more I build on the previous stories that I've done. So that's kind of what happened here is by exploring what was happening in a completely different part of the world, I found out about this connection. And I think the more reporting I do, the more I get stories like that. But also I would just say reading. I read news all the time. I'm curious about a lot of different subjects. And I sometimes will come across something that I just think, oh, what's the story behind this? Or I'd like to know more about this. And then when I find out that, well, no one's really written that much more about it, I start to think, okay, well, maybe I can.
Yeah, perfect. So what about those that doesn't have your experience? Those are just starting out, those are that are graduating from journalism school. What would you give them? Can you give them any an advice just to get started?
I think this is tough because it's so hard to make freelance journalism work financially a lot of the time. But I would say to just go and do stories. I think, unlike a lot of other professions, journalism is something that you can kind of just do. You don't need a license to do it. You don't need to be employed by somebody to do it. And so if you're not having a backer, or a company, if you're not able to get that job, or if that job doesn't exist that will allow you to cover the stories you want to cover, I would say just go and do them, and that will eventually lead you to where you want to go.
Start small.
Yes.
Perfect. So, Raquel, what would you say? What are some of the first steps that you've taken in, where are this reporting taking you?
So at the moment, I am trying to identify the specific cases, the specific interviewees who can be the anchor for the features that I will write. And that will help me to figure out when and how I will conduct the reporting trips. But as I was saying earlier, I will start by conducting interviews in Hong Kong, and then the idea is to go to some of these women's home countries like the Philippines, Indonesia, potentially Sri Lanka, and I would like to interview their families, interview their potentially if some workers return home to understand their experience after they return home. At the same time, I am starting to speak with organizations who support these workers, and I'm trying to find the best way to collect data because there is a huge vacuum on this issue.
So, everyone who's ever tried to write any journalistic text knows that one of the hardest parts is finding cases. How do you find your cases?
So a bit like what Diana was saying, I've been covering these issues for more than 10 years now. I've been based in Asia for about 15 years, and a lot of my focus has been on migration, gender equality, and so these days people tend to approach me. They know that I'm familiar with these problems. They've seen previous stories, and so I kind of already have a strong network who either approach me or then it could be, say, workers themselves or lawyers who are working on important cases, or social workers who feel like that a journalistic piece could help raising awareness or could help push for policy change. So essentially, people see the value in engaging with media. And at the same time, I also try to kind of be in the loop, I try to keep in touch with many of my sources and many of my interviewees for an extended period of time. So even if I finish a story, I will probably check on some of my interviewees, not necessarily because I'm intending to do another story, but because I want to know how they are doing, and they may also hear something within their communities that could be worth covering.
Yeah, so you're maintaining your relationship with your interviewees.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
And what I'm hearing is that you try to build a lot of trust over time with the people that you're interviewing. How do you go about um, building trust with those that you're meeting?
Yeah. I mean, that's crucial, especially for these type of stories that are so personal, that like you absolutely need to, I would say, initially to take a very respectful approach. I mean, throughout the entire process, you need to take a very respectful approach, but especially initially, you need to like show that you will respect their time, like you will respect the pace at which they will want to share information. Like, you know, when we are talking about, for instance, cancer patients, obviously I will not expect that they will be available to be interviewed, you know, whenever it suits me. It's very much like when they feel comfortable talking to me, making the space and the time that suits them really. I think that's a good start to build a relationship of trust. And then, you know, as you publish stories and people see that you did a good job with someone else's story, I think they also immediately gain confidence that you will also do a good job with their own story. But I would say another way of like building that sort of relationship is just explain why you are doing these sort of projects, like what your intentions are, and also be realistic about the expectations that they may have and the potential impact of the project. So kind of guiding them through the entire process and being realistic about what they may expect.
Yeah, yeah. Manage expectations.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
How did Kim inspire you and this project?
So, you know, I've known I know of Kim for a long time also because we worked at the same newspaper at one point, even though at different moments. I think we kind of were there during the same year, but we didn't quite overlap. So I had heard about her, and so we belong to the same generation of journalists. Like we left J school around the same time, and I believe, and I can see through her stories, that we both shared a love for underreported stories, like for journalism as a form of social justice, and also a passion for writing and long form. Like I can feel that when I read Kim's stories. Um, and and Kim did a sort of independent, fierce, and at the same time empathetic journalism that I admire and that I'm trying to pursue as a freelance journalist. Um, so I believe that my project is the sort of story that she would have embraced because it amplifies the voice of a largely ignored community, and especially at a time when there is such negative rhetoric about migrant workers around the world. So her stories have definitely been very inspiring, and her ethos.
And what do you say, Diana?
Yeah, I mean, that was just so beautifully put about, you know, being empathetic with her journalism and also just relentlessly curious. So all of those aspects really inspire me as well. I think what really drew me to uh, this project and to this grant was the description that Kim looked for stories about the undercurrents of rebellion, which I just love that phrase. I think that's something that pulls me in as well. I love stories about people that are challenging norms, pushing back against convention. So I also saw that Kim also covered some of these same issues. Like she covered nuclear fallout in the Marshall Islands. Again, this was kind of, and she talked about the impact of climate change on that, which at the time that she wrote it was such a new combination. And I ended up later completely independently doing a story about the impact of climate change on nuclear waste in Kyrgyzstan. And so to look back and see that we were reporting around some of these same issues is really inspiring to know that I'm on the same kind of track as her. And yeah, with this story that I'm doing, I really hope to bring that kind of incisive journalism to the story, because it's really about people pushing back against, the biggest government that there is, the US government, and saying that it's not okay what's happening and it's also not legal. But this is something that's completely underreported, and we all kind of take what's happening for granted. So I really hope I can kind of ask some of those hard questions and share the story with people while also being empathetic and recognizing the trauma that a lot of people who experience the fallout of nuclear testing go through. So I really am inspired by all of Kim's work in that regard.
Thank you. Nadine, the world is yours.
Thank you. And congratulations again. I'm gonna pop in. I see there was one question that came up for the two grantees, and then there's another question we'll come back to for Tom and Ingrid. We'll come back at the end. But the question about that Kathy asks about whether you worry about your safety doing these kinds of investigations and how you sort of navigate that as journalists. So just would love to hear you weigh in on that. And who would like to start?
I can start. Yeah, I will say it's definitely something I think about. As a female freelance journalist, a lot of the time I'm traveling to places where, it's not so much that I travel in like places that are, ridden with conflict or dangerous in that sense. But it's more so just putting yourself in these situations where you could be alone with sources, although that's one of my strategies. I try not to do that if possible. And or just in places that are unfamiliar. And so I think you always just have to have good street sense, follow your gut, don't do things that are unnecessary, I would say. And it's tough because sometimes you want to, and I have this curiosity, and I have generally trust in people. But I try to think more logically about it, and take calculated risks. You can never completely remove all risk, but you can minimize it. And I've taken some webinars from organizations that provide training for safety, freelance journalist safety, the Committee to Protect Journalists, and that's also really helpful. And then just try to tell people where you are, even if it's not like an editor that you're directly in touch with, friends, family, just make sure people know where you are.
That is a great piece of advice for sure. Raquel, anything to add to that, or how you also think about the safety of your sources, who would often be probably very vulnerable people?
Yeah, exactly. So with sources, and especially for these type of projects, is quite tricky because they may not necessarily be very familiar with the most secure tools. So when possible, I prefer to meet them face to face. So that's kind of my general approach. But I would say that these days, like safety issues are so multifolded. I would probably say, that many journalists around the world are facing threats from governments, and some of them are very new threats. So we are trying to figure out what they mean. Like where I'm based, things are changing a lot, and anything that is written that can challenge policy might be problematic. We are not sure. So that's one aspect that journalists need to consider depending on where they are based. Then, you know, when I think about some of the places where I travel to, that can some of these places like the Philippines has an extremely high rate of killings, and many of the targets have been journalists. So you know, I would say try to make an assessment of the risks that you may face on the ground, and like be connected with locals. I would say it's always like one of the best things to do, to let people know where you are, like Diana was saying as well, and kind of like try to minimize risks, knowing that that's almost that is impossible, really. But at the end of the day, like kind of feeling if those risks are worth taking or not. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's always a very complicated and personal calculation to make those calls. So now I want to turn our conversation actually to a past Kimmel Memorial Fund grantee, Mahima Jain, who is joining us today from India. And we wanted to just have a chance to catch up. Thank you for being with us today, Mahima, and to hear a little bit about what you've been working on since you received the grant. You are an independent journalist reporting on socioeconomic issues in India, and you're reporting for the fund focused on labor inequity for marginalized communities. So maybe you can start with a very short refresher of the project that you did for this grant, and then tell us what you've been up to since then, and if you've seen any tangible, you know, outcomes from the story that you reported.
Thank you, Nadine. Congratulations, Raquel and Diana. It's so exciting to see two exciting projects take off under this grant. I was a grantee in 2023, and my project focused on labor and inequity. The main focus was to kind of find groups of people who are marginalized in the workplace in different ways. And the two or three groups that I looked at through a series of stories for different publications, one were women entrepreneurs, the second was transgender persons in the workforce, in formal workforce, and Muslim women in India. And in different ways, these groups are either persecuted or marginalized. And so the stories kind of looked at what happens when they try to enter the workforce and how do their lives unfold in that process. Earlier Diana mentioned that Kim's, one of the descriptions for this grant is undercurrents of rebellion. And sometimes that can just be living your life to the best of your potential and just going about finding an honest day of work. And even that can be a threat to someone else, as we're seeing now with the DEI policy rollbacks in the US, for example. So these stories kind of looked at what normal people's lives, how are they complicated when they are at the intersection of these different kinds of marginalizations. So one of the stories, for example, was on trans people in India. We have over 400,000, 500,000 trans people in India, and they are often, according to data, in professions that are not they're not in formal employment. They're often in either begging or prostitution or other employments that are not considered dignified. So this story looked at a bunch of young trans men who wanted to be in white-collar jobs and how they went about getting those jobs, or how they went about kind of reconciling their identities. From a very, very early age, they knew they were trans. So this is not a and these were not men who were from urban areas. These were people from rural areas, and these were people who didn't speak the language that urban LGBTQI folks did. So how did they kind of enter New Delhi? How did they find support? How did they go about finding jobs, making the transition? And so these stories basically looked at their lives. And so that was one story. And the other one was on Muslim women and what they feel like. So only 5% of working age Muslim women have formal employment in India. So in India, for example, education is often given as this solution to all sorts of patriarchy, poverty. You get educated, you might have a ticket out. And these were educated women who, when they entered the workforce, they saw that life isn't still as easy as they were promised that it would be. They were still facing these kind of what do you call it? They were marginalized in the workplace. They were not given promotions. So things like that. The inequality in the workplace was staring at them in the face. So the stories looked at what life looks like when you try to challenge the status quo. So yeah.
And are you continuing to cover these communities specifically? Have you seen any progress? I assume that it takes a long time to sort of change these inequities anywhere in the world. So what is your motivation to keep covering these communities? And have you seen anything changing?
I think, as you said, it just takes a long time for some of these changes to happen. And it's one step, as we know, it's one step forward, two step back anytime. And so I think there is a lot more reporting that needs to be done on these issues. And we need to continue writing the stories that we write of these everyday stories, tying them to the national and the global scenarios and what's the changes that are happening in these different spaces than what these characters inhabit and how these changes affect these people. So, I mean, I'm grateful to the grant and IWMF for enabling those stories to come forward. I think it's really helped me kind of spend so much time with these people and days on end to just understand what their day looks like, because if we cannot imagine or in a day or two, like, to get a sense of what it is to be that person in a community that is marginalized.
Thank you. And just to finish, just to ask one more question of you, Mahima, if there's something that you're really excited that you're going to be focusing on next, a particular story, project, anything like that.
The last year, I have been working on climate change and looking at how we can write climate stories in a more constructive way. And this was a part of the fellowship that I did in Denmark with the Constructive Institute, where we were looking at how science and reasoning can be used to persuade people to write better climate stories, which are not gloom and doom. So I'm going on a little bit of a break now, but afterwards, I'm hoping that I come back and do more stories about that. I think those are those are needed. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and we're excited to continue to watch your work. As we wrap up the conversation today, I want to open to our audience to ask questions of any of our grantees or to Tom and Ingrid. And we do have one question already. Also want to encourage anyone who's here to share any memories of Kim in the chat that you'd care to put here. But the question I'll start with from Carolyn for Ingrid and Tom is, will there ever be a book about all of the fantastic stories that have been funded so far, a collection of Kim's journalistic legacy?
Oh, we would love to do that, but I think there will be a huge problem with the copyright for using all the stories. So, but we would really love to make a book of it. But I think it's a long way to go for getting the rights to publish the stories. So yeah.
Of course. And also just to open the floor, if any of the grantees want to ask questions of each other as well, we'd love to invite you into the conversation in that way.
So Diana and I, we had a call last week, so we kind of like spent almost 2 hours talking. So we asked a lot of questions to each other. So I would be curious to get to know Mahima as well. And potentially if we could do a face-to-face gathering, that would be great. But if not, we could also do a call at some point. But yeah, I don't know, Diana, would you like to share something else about your project or to ask anything?
I actually, yeah, was just about to say I would love to hear more about Mahima. Like, how did you, first of all, get started in freelance work, and what is that like in India? Like, what is the, what are some of the difficulties around that? Because I know how it is in the US, and it's not great. So, yeah.
Well, I worked in a newspaper for a while before I became a freelance journalist in India. And the reason I chose to be one was it takes, as someone mentioned earlier, a little bit of privilege to kind of be a freelance journalist because it is not easy. I mean, for a lot of reasons. But the reason I wanted to be one was because I really wanted to travel the length and breadth of the country for my stories, meet people, because India is not a monolithic, there are so many Indias, and I really wanted to get to know the people who live in it. So I think it's taken me to more than half the states now of the country, and it has been interesting, challenging, and rewarding in many ways. And some of my stories really just started with, I mean, as you said, the newspaper, but also just wanting to know what kind of lives people live and why do they do what they do. So I think I mean, there's no end to asking this question in a country like India. So I'm super I can continue doing it for the rest of my life, I feel, and I would still not have an answer. So yeah, I think that's why I became a freelance journalist in India. I've written for over 2 dozen publications now. I've been supported by IWMF multiple times, and I'm so grateful for that. So I hope I answered your question, but yeah. When Raquel was talking about migration, one of the things that is a hot topic in India is also the deportations from the US of Indian workers who have allegedly traveled illegally to the US. And one of the stories I recently finished was about the demand for Indian nurses everywhere in the world. And you see Indian nurses in almost every country. And so, I mean, there is just any story you mention, I often see like an India angle or a South Asia angle to it. And so it's fascinating, and I'd love to get to know both of you as well.
Well, you're part of a very special club now, so hopefully we'll all have the opportunity to do that. I do want to just ask one more question, and then I have a final question for Ingrid and Tom. But if there's a favorite story of Kim's that any of you would like to share.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that I was really struck by her reporting from the Marshall Islands. So I would say that was very inspiring to me because she didn't just cover the topic, but really made the characters come to life. And I love her descriptions. I can see the scene, like it's just so vivid. And yeah, it's just a really great body of work that she did in the Marshall Islands.
Thank you. So to Ingrid and Tom, what stories do you think that Kim would have been reporting in 2025? What would be the thing that would be most interesting to her to pursue in this really interesting moment that we're living through?
I mean, she would be all over the place, but she would definitely gone to Greenland. I'm certain of that. She would have found some odd, Kim angle on the whole situation, and possibly including pets in some way. But she would definitely have gone to Greenland.
That makes sense to me. Ingrid, what about you?
Yes, Greenland definitely. It was yeah, she was very interested in Greenland for since she was a small girl, and I think she would have been very frustrated, angry, and worried about the situation for the freedom of the press in the whole world, and not especially, yeah, especially in some countries, and even here in Europe, and not in Scandinavia, but in other European countries. And she will have been the first to march for freedom of the press.
Thank you. Yes, I agreed. It is a really perilous moment for journalists around the world. And I think that's one reason why having this fund is so important, to be able to make sure that these stories can continue to be told. Ingrid and Tom, we're so grateful to everything that you do to keep Kim's memory alive. We're very grateful to our grantees for being a part of this conversation today and for now being part of the IWMF family. In the chat, you can see a couple of links. One is linking to much of Kim's writing, and also to the Kim Wall Memorial Fund page, where you can learn more about the program and about how to support its future. And we also hope that you will keep an eye out for both Diana and Raquel's stories that will be coming out through these grants. We want to wrap up today just by wishing Kim again a happy birthday and remembering her incredible life and legacy. And thank you all for being a part of that. Have a great day.